Arthur Jenkins, his shoulders stooped with the unseen weight of years and memories, watched the young hotel manager, Tiffany, her name tag gleaming under the two bright lights, tack on a hefty pet fee to his bill. His loyal Labrador, Buddy, sat patiently by his worn leather suitcase, a beacon of calm in Arthur's quiet storm. Moments later, as Tiffany was about to slide the keycards across the polished counter, the front desk phone shrilled with an unexpected urgency. Tiffany answered, her professional smile faltering as she listened. Her eyes, moments before alight with the righteousness of policy, widened, then darted towards Arthur, her face paling. She stammered into the receiver, then, covering the mouthpiece, looked at Arthur with a bewildering mix of confusion and sudden deference. "Mr. Jenkins, I've just been instructed. I need to ask you to vacate your current reservation immediately." It was 11:30 p.m. on a Tuesday, and the Grand Vista Hotel lobby hummed with the forced quiet of late hours. Arthur Jenkins, 72 years etched onto his face, felt every one of the 12 hours he'd driven from his small home in Ohio to attend his granddaughter Sarah's college graduation in Pennsylvania. Buddy, his golden-brown service Labrador, lay quietly at his feet, his breathing a soft, reassuring rhythm. The air in the lobby was a sterile mix of industrial-grade carpet cleaner and the faint, lingering aroma of the day's complimentary coffee, a scent that did little to soothe Arthur's frayed nerves. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting long, unsettling shadows that made Arthur unconsciously scan for exits, a habit ingrained from a lifetime ago. Tiffany, the front desk manager, couldn't have been older than 25. Her movements were efficient, almost robotic, as she processed his prepaid reservation. Everything seemed routine until her gaze fell upon Buddy. Her smile tightened. "Sir," she began, her voice crisp and authoritative, "I see you have an animal with you. Our hotel has a very strict pet policy." She tapped a few keys on her computer. "That will be a $150 non-refundable cleaning fee, plus a $50 per night supplemental charge." Arthur blinked slowly, reaching into his worn satchel. "He's not a pet, ma'am. He's my service animal." He carefully produced a laminated card identifying Buddy as a PTSD support animal, along with a folder containing his training certifications and a letter from the Department of Veterans Affairs. He'd been through this dozens of times. Usually, the documents cleared up any confusion. Tiffany barely glanced at the proffered paperwork, her perfectly sculpted eyebrows arching slightly. "Sir, with all due respect, corporate has been very clear. We're cracking down on what they call convenience pets being passed off as service animals. We've seen all sorts of documents, many of which can unfortunately be printed from anywhere online these days." She offered a thin, unsympathetic smile. "Policy is policy. All animals incur the additional charges." Her gaze flickered over Arthur's stooped frame and tired eyes. "Besides," she added, her tone softening with a hint of condescension, "service animals are generally for more visible disabilities. Like for people who are blind, or in wheelchairs. You seem fine to me, sir, just understandably tired from your journey." Fine. Arthur hadn't felt truly fine since the humid, blood-soaked jungles of Vietnam in '69. He'd been a sergeant back then, barely older than Tiffany was now, responsible for a dozen young men who trusted him with their lives. He remembered the constant thrum of helicopters, the acrid smell of cordite, the suffocating fear that was a constant companion. One particular ambush, on a steamy August afternoon near Da Nang, replayed in his mind with sickening clarity, the sudden burst of enemy fire, the screams, the sight of young PFC Miller, who just received a letter from his sweetheart, falling silent beside him. Arthur had pulled 3 survivors out that day, earning a Purple Heart for the shrapnel that still ached in his left leg on cold nights, but the invisible wounds, the ones that haunted his sleep and shadowed his waking hours, were far deeper. He'd come home to a country that didn't understand, or didn't want to. He'd buried the memories, or tried to, building a life, raising a family, but the ghosts of the past were relentless. Buddy was the anchor that kept those ghosts at bay. The PTSD had worsened in his later years, manifesting as crippling anxiety in crowded places, sudden, overwhelming panic attacks triggered by unexpected noises, and night terrors that left him thrashing in sweat-soaked sheets, reliving the horror. His VA doctor had recommended a service animal, and Buddy had come into his life 18 months ago from a dedicated veteran support organization. The gentle Labrador was trained to recognize the subtle shifts in Arthur's breathing, the tremor in his hands, the distant look in his eyes that heralded an oncoming episode. Buddy would nudge him awake from nightmares, a warm, solid presence in the terrifying darkness. In public, if Arthur grew disoriented, Buddy would create a physical barrier, a small zone of safety, or apply gentle pressure with his head or body, grounding Arthur back to the present. Without Buddy, a trip like this, for Sarah's graduation, an event he wouldn't miss for the world, would have been impossible. "Ma'am," Arthur said, his voice quiet but firm, trying to keep the tremor of rising frustration out of it. "Buddy isn't a convenience pet. He helps me with a condition I have from my time in the service." He pushed the VA letter a little closer. "This explains it." Tiffany's expression remained unmoved. She tapped her pen on the counter. "I appreciate your service, Mr. Jenkins, truly. My grandfather served. But rules are for everyone's benefit. If I make an exception for you, I have to make one for everyone who claims their Chihuahua is an emotional support animal just to avoid the fee." Her gaze was pointed, implying Arthur was no different. Arthur took a slow, deliberate breath, Buddy sensing his rising stress and pressing his head gently against his master's calf. Federal law, the Americans with Disabilities Act, specifically prohibits charging fees for legitimate service animals. They are not pets, they are medical equipment, like a wheelchair or an oxygen tank. He carefully laid out Buddy's official service animal registration from the state, alongside his own VA medical documentation confirming his diagnosis and the necessity of a service animal. Each document was pristine, carried with the care of something vital. The lobby, though sparsely populated at this late hour, seemed to magnify their conversation. A businessman in a crisp suit, waiting by the elevator bank, paused his phone scrolling to watch. An elderly couple, who had been quietly conversing on a nearby sofa, now sat in attentive silence. Arthur felt a familiar tightness in his chest, the precursor to the walls closing in, the sensation Buddy was trained to mitigate. Tiffany, however, seemed to perceive Arthur's calm explanation as a challenge to her authority. Her professional veneer hardened into a defensive posture. "Sir, I am also aware of the law," she stated, her voice a little sharper now. "And part of my responsibility as manager is to protect this hotel from those who would abuse the system." Frankly, she continued, her eyes narrowing slightly as she looked Buddy up and down, "your dog looks more like a well-groomed pet than what I'd consider a typical service animal. Real service animals are usually very specific breeds, you know, trained to a very high standard that's visibly apparent." She seemed to imply that Buddy, a friendly-looking Labrador, didn't fit her preconceived notion of a working dog. With a decisive click of her mouse, she added the charges to Arthur's bill. The total now reflected an additional $200. She slid his room keycards across the counter with an air of finality and obvious irritation. "You're quite lucky we're even allowing him on the premises at all, Mr. Jenkins. Many establishments have a strict no animals, period policy. So, you should probably be grateful for this accommodation." Arthur stared at the updated bill displayed on the small guest-facing monitor. $200. It was the money he'd carefully set aside for Sarah's graduation gift, a special edition of her favorite author's collected works. The financial sting was sharp, but the burn of injustice was far worse. He'd fought for his country, sacrificed pieces of his youth, his health, his peace of mind, and now, in his twilight years, he was being penalized, made to feel like a cheat, for needing help to navigate the wreckage of that sacrifice. He remembered a particularly grueling patrol, trapped for 2 days under enemy fire, sharing his last canteen of water with a wounded comrade. The memory, juxtaposed with this petty, demeaning confrontation over a few $100s, filled him with a weary anger. Buddy, ever attuned, shifted closer, applying more insistent pressure against Arthur's leg, a silent reminder, "I'm here. Breathe." The businessman by the elevator shook his head almost imperceptibly, a flicker of sympathy in his eyes, but he didn't intervene. The elderly couple looked down, pretending not to be listening, yet their very stillness screamed otherwise. Arthur felt exposed, vulnerable in a way that enemy fire had never made him feel. At least then, the threat was clear, the enemy defined. Something inside Arthur, a resilient core forged in the crucible of war and tempered by years of quiet endurance, refused to buckle. It wasn't just about the money anymore, or even his own pride. It was about the principle. It was for all the other veterans, the ones with wounds seen and unseen, who might walk into this hotel, or another like it, and face the same ignorance, the same dismissal. He thought of his granddaughter Sarah, her bright spirit and her fierce belief in doing what was right. He had to stand his ground. He took another deep breath, letting it out slowly. "Ma'am," he said, his voice regaining its steadiness, "could you please provide me with the contact information for your general manager? Or perhaps someone at your corporate office?" Tiffany rolled her eyes, a gesture of performative exasperation. "The night duty manager went home over an hour ago, and Mr. Harrison, the general manager, won't be in until 9 a.m. If you're that upset about following hotel policy," she added with a saccharine smile that didn't reach her eyes, "you can always file a complaint through our website." Arthur nodded slowly. He reached into his pocket and retrieved his old, slightly battered smartphone. Its screen was small, the casing scuffed, but it served its purpose. He fumbled with it for a moment, then activated the video recording function. The small red light blinked on. Tiffany's demeanor shifted instantly from dismissive to hostile. "What do you think you're doing?" she demanded, her voice rising. "You do not have my permission to record me. This is private property. I will call security if you don't put that device away immediately. I am documenting what I believe to be a potential violation of my civil rights under the Americans with Disabilities Act, ma'am," Arthur stated calmly, holding the phone steady. "For legal purposes." That was when Tiffany made her biggest mistake. Goaded by his refusal to back down and the perceived challenge to her authority, she snapped. "Oh, for heaven's sake." Her voice, no longer modulated for customer service, echoed across the quiet lobby, sharp and accusatory. "That is clearly a fake service dog. You probably just bought that ridiculous vest on Amazon and trained him yourself to scam free stays at hotels. Real veterans, decorated veterans, have more dignity than to try and pull a stunt like this." The words, "fake service dog" and "scam," hung venomously in the air. Buddy didn't flinch, his training holding firm, but Arthur felt the insult like a physical blow. The businessman, who had been observing the escalating confrontation with a deepening frown, now discreetly turned his back to them and put his own phone to his ear, speaking in low, urgent tones. He was a partner at a prominent law firm, in town for a deposition, and while not a specialist in ADA law, he knew injustice and unprofessionalism when he saw it. More importantly, he knew people who knew people. Just as Tiffany, flushed with anger, reached for her own phone, presumably to call hotel security as threatened, the front desk phone let out another shrill, insistent ring. It cut through the tense atmosphere like a scalpel. With an exasperated sigh, she snatched it up. "Grand Vista Hotel, Tiffany speaking, how can I," she began, but her words trailed off as she listened to the voice on the other end. Arthur watched as the color drained from her face. Her eyes, which had been fixed on him with animosity, now flickered with confusion, then a dawning, horrified understanding. Her posture, moments before ramrod straight with indignation, began to crumple. "Yes. I understand. But. No, sir. Yes, of course." Her responses were clipped, barely audible. The call was from the Grand Vista Hotel's corporate headquarters, specifically their vice president of legal affairs and compliance. The businessman's call had been remarkably effective, routed through a personal contact on the hotel group's board, who had, in turn, immediately escalated the complaint. The voice on the phone was not loud, but it carried the unmistakable weight of absolute authority. It calmly but firmly informed Tiffany that her handling of the situation with Mr. Jenkins and his documented service animal was a serious violation of federal ADA law, exposing the hotel chain to potentially massive fines, lawsuits, and a public relations nightmare they were keen to avoid. Then came the part that made Tiffany physically sway. The corporate VP mentioned that, as a matter of routine in such escalated complaints involving veterans, they had cross-referenced Mr. Jenkins' details through a Veterans Affairs liaison program the hotel group proudly partnered with for their Hiring Heroes initiative. Ms. Miller, the voice had said, using her surname, "We are looking at Mr. Arthur Jenkins' file. He is not just any guest. He is a decorated veteran of the United States Army, a recipient of the Purple Heart for injuries sustained in combat. His service records are exemplary. This incident is rapidly escalating beyond a simple service dog dispute. This is now a question of how the Grand Vista Hotel Corporation treats our nation's heroes. And frankly, your actions are indefensible." The weight of who Arthur was, not a man of monetary wealth or overt power, but a man who had honorably served his country and whose sacrifices were officially documented and respected at the highest levels of the organization she worked for, crashed down upon Tiffany. Her earlier certainty that she was merely following policy evaporated, replaced by the chilling realization of her career jeopardizing misjudgment. Tiffany hung up the phone, her hand trembling. She stared at Arthur, no longer with suspicion or annoyance, but with a look of stunned, abject apology. "Mr. Jenkins," she began, her voice barely a whisper, I am so incredibly sorry. There has been a terrible misunderstanding. A grievous error on my part." Without another word, she turned to her computer, her fingers flying across the keyboard. The offending charges vanished from Arthur's bill. "Corporate has instructed me to inform you that your entire stay will, of course, be complimentary," she said, avoiding his gaze. And they've upgraded you to our presidential suite. As a small token of our profound apology for this unacceptable lapse in service." She fumbled with a new set of keycards. "Please, allow me to offer you complimentary breakfast, late checkout, anything at all that might make amends." 40 minutes later, Mr. Harrison, the general manager, arrived, looking rumpled and stressed, clearly having been roused from his bed. He approached Arthur, who was now sitting quietly with Buddy in a more comfortable part of the lobby, with an expression of utmost concern. "Mr. Jenkins, I cannot apologize enough for what you've experienced tonight," he said, extending his hand. "This is not who we are at Grand Vista, and I give you my personal assurance that Ms. Miller will be undergoing immediate and extensive retraining on ADA compliance and sensitivity. Furthermore," he added, "we would be honored if you would allow us to cover the cost of your granddaughter's graduation gift as a further gesture of our deep regret." He handed Arthur his personal business card. "Anything you need, now or in the future, you call me directly." The Jenkins incident, as it became known internally, though Arthur's name was kept confidential in broader communications, triggered more than just one employee's retraining. Grand Vista Hotels initiated a chain-wide review of their service animal policies and implemented mandatory, comprehensive ADA and sensitivity training for all guest-facing staff. New protocols were established to respectfully verify service animal documentation, including a direct liaison with veteran service organizations for quicker, more dignified confirmation when needed. Digital signage about service animal rights began to appear in their lobbies. Finally, close to 2 a.m., Arthur and Buddy entered the expansive presidential suite. It was larger than Arthur's entire downstairs floor back home. Buddy, ever diligent, performed his customary security sweep, sniffing corners and checking behind curtains before settling by the enormous king-sized bed with a contented sigh. For the first time in hours, Arthur felt the crushing weight on his chest begin to lift. The validation was welcome, but it wasn't about the opulent room or the apologies. It was the quiet satisfaction of knowing he hadn't backed down, that his stand might prevent another veteran, another person with an invisible wound, from enduring a similar indignity. He thought of Sarah, imagined her proud smile at her graduation tomorrow. He could finally rest. 6 months after the incident, Arthur received a handwritten letter from Mr. Harrison, the general manager. It updated him on the success of their new training initiatives and thanked him again for his patience and for inadvertently helping them become a better, more inclusive company. Tucked inside was another, shorter note, penned in a neat, almost hesitant script. It was from Tiffany. She expressed her sincere remorse for her actions that night, explaining that the incident had been a profound learning experience. She was now, ironically, one of the lead trainers for new hires on service animal awareness and guest sensitivity. The true victory, Arthur knew, wasn't the free suite or the corporate apologies. It was the quiet ripple of change, the knowledge that one small act of standing firm against ignorance could lead to greater understanding and respect. It was for every person navigating the world with an invisible disability, relying on the unwavering support of an animal partner like Buddy. These animals aren't just pets with special vests, they are lifelines, highly trained companions who help their humans reclaim their lives. Comment below, have you or someone you know ever faced misunderstanding or discrimination due to an invisible condition or needing special assistance? Share your story. Let's show our respect for all veterans and individuals relying on service animals. Their quiet battles often go unseen. Like this story if you believe in standing up for what's right and fostering a more understanding world. Share it to spread awareness about the vital role of service animals and the importance of treating everyone with dignity. Don't forget to subscribe for more impactful stories that champion the human spirit.